He didn't know the woman whose wrist he was crushing owned everything in the city. He didn't know it, and in about 90 seconds, it was going to cost him everything. The coffee cup exploded across the marble counter before anyone understood what had happened. Dark liquid splashed across the businessman's tailored suit, spreading in an ugly stain across $3,000 of Italian wool. And his furious voice tore through the crowded cafe like a slap. "You embarrassed me in front of my clients," he barked. "You are not walking away from this." He reached forward and seized the young woman's wrist, fingers closing around it like a manacle, and the entire cafe went silent. Forks stopped halfway to open mouths, conversations died mid-sentence. A waitress froze near the pastry case with a full tray balanced on her palm, afraid the smallest movement might turn all of that anger toward her. Even the soft jazz drifting from the corner speakers seemed to shrink back, distant and small beneath the tension that pressed down on the room like a hand. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. That was the thing people would remember later, when they told the story to friends who didn't believe them. An ordinary cafe, the smell of espresso and warm pastry in the air, sunlight coming in slantwise through the front windows, and then all of it frozen in an instant around one man's rage and one woman's fear. Across the cafe, near the window, a man let go of his daughter's hand. He set his cup down without a sound. His eyes, warm a moment ago, crinkled at the corners from something his daughter had just said, locked onto the counter and did not move. The woman was dressed simply, a burgundy dress and a small black handbag over one shoulder. Nothing about her that said money, nothing that said power. She tried to pull free without making a scene. "Please let go," she said, her voice steady. "I'm asking you one last time." Instead of listening, the man tightened his grip until his knuckles went white. "You owe me respect," he hissed. "You don't get to reject people like me." Several customers watched with wide, nervous eyes. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone in that room was waiting for someone else to be the one to help. Each of them silently praying the responsibility would land on a stranger's shoulders and not their own. It is a strange thing that happens to people in a crowd. Alone, most of them would have done something. Together, each of them waited for the others, and the waiting became a wall, and the wall became a kind of permission for the thing to keep happening. In the crowd, a young man half lifted his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. Part of him wanted proof, something to post later with a caption about how terrible it was. But recording it would have meant admitting he saw it. And admitting he saw it would have meant he was supposed to do something. So he lowered the phone again and looked away, down into his own coffee. As if not seeing it might make it not his problem. That was the moment the room revealed itself. Dozens of good, ordinary, decent people who loved their families and thought of themselves as the kind who would help, and every single one of them chose the safety of staying seated. Near the window, the man who had let go of his daughter's hand watched all of it. He watched the woman try to pull away. He watched the grip tighten. He watched 24 people decide, one by one, that it wasn't their job. His name was David Turner. He was 34 years old, and he had come home from a long Navy deployment only 2 days earlier, his body still running on a clock set to a different part of the world. He had one quiet afternoon with his 8-year-old daughter before he had to report back to base the following morning, and he had promised her this, exactly this, a normal afternoon, hot chocolate with too much whipped cream and a window seat, and absolutely nothing going wrong. He had missed her 7th birthday to a deployment. He had missed her first day of 3rd grade. He had promised himself that for a few hours he would just be her dad, and nothing more complicated than that. His military backpack rested beneath his chair, worn canvas gone soft at the corners. To everyone inside that cafe, David looked like nothing more than a tired single father in a faded shirt. A man who had seen a long week and wanted a quiet cup of coffee. No one knew what he had done overseas, or what he had seen, or carried. No one knew the kind of steadiness that gets built into a man who has stood between danger and other people more times than he can count. The way you can only learn it, slowly, in the places where staying calm is the difference between people going home and people not. His daughter tugged gently on his sleeve. "Dad," Olivia whispered. Her small voice was thin with worry, the whipped cream on her hot chocolate forgotten. "She's scared." David looked down at her. 8 years old, 2 missing teeth, hair in 2 careful braids he had done himself that morning at the kitchen counter, while she sat very still and gave him firm instructions about which way the part should go. She had his steady eyes. She was watching the counter the way children watch things they don't fully understand but feel all the way down, in the place where they first learn what the world is and how people in it are supposed to treat each other. She wasn't asking him to fix it. She was just telling him what she saw, trusting him with it, the way she trusted him with everything. And in the way she looked up at him, he understood that whatever he did in the next 30 seconds, she was going to remember it. She was going to build a small piece of who she became out of what her father did right now. He held her gaze for a moment, and something in his chest settled into a decision, quiet and complete. Years in the United States Navy had taught David something that most people never learned. Real danger did not always begin with a fist. Sometimes it began quietly, in the exact moment a person decided they could hurt someone else and walk away from it without a single consequence. That was the moment that mattered, not the punch, the decision behind it. He had seen where that moment led when no one stepped in front of it, and he had seen what it cost, and he had learned in his bones that the space between a threat and a tragedy is often nothing more than one person willing to stand up while everyone else stays sitting down. Most of the time, that was the whole story. One person, deciding, he folded his napkin slowly and laid it beside his cup. "Stay right here," he said. Olivia nodded, though the worry didn't leave her face. "Okay," she said. "I will." And then, because she was 8 and because she trusted him completely, she added, in a small voice, "Be careful, Dad." David rose from his chair. He didn't hurry. He crossed the calf floor with slow, even steps, not angry, not nervous, simply certain. The walk of a man who had already decided what he was willing to do and was no longer troubled by the outcome. A few heads turned to follow him. The tension in the room shifted toward him like a current. The businessman noticed him approaching and laughed, a short, ugly sound. "What?" he said. David stopped a few feet away. He kept his voice level, almost gentle. "She asked you to let go." The man rolled his eyes and turned his shoulder, dismissing him. "This is between us." David didn't look at the man. He looked at the woman, at her wrist, at the fear tightening the corners of her eyes. "Do you know him?" he asked her. She shook her head. "No." That single word changed everything. David's expression hardened, the calm settling into something colder and more solid. "You hurt her," he said. "Take your hand off her." The businessman stepped closer, still gripping the woman's wrist, drawing himself up to full height like a man used to winning arguments by looming over them. He was taller than David and broader in the shoulders, and he clearly expected that to mean something. He looked David up and down, slow and insulting, taking in the faded shirt, the worn shoes, the cheap watch, the ordinary tiredness of him, cataloging every sign that this was a man of no importance, a man who could be dismissed. His lip curled. "And who exactly are you?" he sneered. "Some soldier? You think that's supposed to impress me?" There was something underneath the words, uglier than simple anger. A contempt that went beyond the moment. An assumption about who David was and what he was worth and where he belonged, written into the way the man's eyes moved over him, into the particular way he said soldier, as though it were a small thing, a thing beneath him. The calf heard it. It was the kind of thing you can hear even when it isn't said out loud, the sound of a man looking at another man and deciding he is less. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A woman near the window winced. David didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He had heard that tone before, in other places, from other men who mistook volume for strength and cruelty for power. and he had long ago stopped letting it touch him. "No," he said quietly. "But respecting people should." The businessman laughed louder, a performance of a laugh, and glanced around as if searching for an audience to laugh along with him, some ally who would confirm that he was the reasonable one here. He found none. Customers whispered nervously to one another, but no one laughed with him. And the sound of his own laughter alone in a silent room seemed to make him angrier. "This is going to get ugly," someone murmured near the back. "Somebody call security." The cafe manager hurried out from behind the register. A young man barely 30, hands raised, palms out, his voice pitched high and anxious. He had never been trained for this. No one is ever trained for this. "Gentlemen, please, let's all just calm down. Whatever this is, I'm sure we can. There's no need for," he never finished. The businessman turned and shoved David hard in the chest, both hands flat, all his weight behind it, the shove of a man who had never once in his life been shoved back. "I said stay out of my business," he snapped. David barely moved. His feet stayed planted, his shoulders square, absorbing the shove the way a wall absorbs a thrown pebble. Years of training had built something into him that a rich man's temper could not budge. A stillness earned in places this man would never see. And the shove told David everything he needed to know. The man had crossed from words into violence. He would not stop on his own. Without raising his voice, David gave him one last warning. "Walk away," he said. "You still have the chance." The businessman's face twisted. "Or what?" He spat and swung. The movement lasted less than a second. His arm came up and around, fast and wild, aimed at David's jaw, thrown with the full weight of his fury behind it. But fury is not the same thing as skill, and David had already read it before it even began, in the drop of the man's shoulder, in the shift of his weight to his back foot, in the small tell that anyone who has trained long enough learns to see coming a heartbeat before it arrives. Time seemed to slow for David the way it always did in these moments, everything going quiet and clear. He stepped to the side, smooth and unhurried, barely more than a lean, and the fist passed through the empty air where his head had been. In the same motion, without any wasted movement at all, his hand closed around the front of the man's expensive jacket, and he turned, using the man's own momentum against him, letting the force of the missed punch carry the man forward and down, and pinned him back against the marble counter before a second blow could ever be thrown. Gasps erupted across the cafe. Someone cried out. A cup rolled off a nearby table and shattered on the floor, and nobody so much as glanced at it. The businessman found himself bent backward over the counter, held in place by one steady arm, his fine suit crumpling against the stone. Completely unable to move. David never punched him. He never yelled. He never threatened him. He didn't so much as tighten his grip beyond what was needed to hold the man still, and somehow that was more frightening to watch than violence would have been. Because everyone in that room could see that David had chosen exactly how much force to use, and not 1 ounce more. "Listen to me carefully," David said, and his voice was so calm, so quiet and level, that it made the whole room go quieter still, every person leaning in without meaning to. "I don't enjoy fighting. I've done enough of it to last a lifetime. But I will never stand by and watch someone hurt a woman. Not while I'm in the room." For the first time since it began, the young woman in the burgundy dress let herself breathe. She had spent the last minute braced for something worse, certain that no one was going to help her, that she was on her own the way she had somehow always been on her own. And now, watching this ordinary stranger hold the entire storm still with one hand and a soft voice, she felt something she had not felt walk into that cafe with her. She felt safe. She moved a half step closer to David and rested one hand lightly on his arm. The businessman struggled against the grip and got absolutely nowhere, and the getting nowhere seemed to frighten him more than anything else. His face went red with fury, and then, underneath the fury, something new bled through. The first cold edge of real fear, the dawning understanding that for once in his life the situation was not going to bend to his will. "Get your hands off me," he snarled, but there was a crack in it now. "You have no idea who I am." David looked him directly in the eyes, unhurried, almost kind. "No," he said. "And honestly, I don't care." Outside the glass doors, 2 security guards came running down the sidewalk, drawn by a bystander who had finally done something and gone to fetch them. They shouldered through the entrance and into a scene that made them stop short. A well-dressed man bent backward against the counter and an ordinary-looking father in a faded shirt holding him there without apparent effort. To fresh eyes walking in cold, it looked like exactly one thing. Several customers immediately pointed at David. He grabbed him. One voice cried out, "That man just attacked him, I saw it." But others cut in just as fast, half rising from their chairs, unwilling to let the lie stand. "No, you didn't see what happened," a woman said sharply, standing all the way up. "That's backwards. He saved her. That man," she pointed hard at the businessman, "grabbed her first. By the wrist. She asked him 3 times to let go." "It's true," said an older gentleman near the counter. "I watched the whole thing. The young man only stepped in when the other one threw a punch." The guards hesitated, heads turning from one face to another, and the easy certainty drained out of them. They had walked in on the last frame of a story and had no idea what came before it, and now half the room was telling them one thing and the other half another. One of them held up a broad hand. "Everybody just stay where you are," he said. "One at a time. Somebody tell me what actually happened." The whole calf seemed to hold its breath at once, waiting to see which way it would tip. "Would you have stood up? If you were sitting in that calf watching a stranger grab a frightened woman by the wrist, would you have gotten out of your chair? Or would you have looked down at your coffee and hoped someone else would? Be honest. Type stand up in the comments and subscribe to this channel, because what this woman is about to reveal changes absolutely everything. And you are not going to want to miss it. David slowly released the businessman's jacket and stepped back, giving him room, keeping himself between the man and the woman without seeming to try. The businessman straightened his collar with shaking hands, breathing hard, his eyes darting around the room in search of allies and finding only faces that would not meet his. The calf manager turned to the woman, his professional calm cracking at the edges, his hands not quite steady. "Ma'am," he said, "are you all right? Do you want us to call the police? Do you need?" She nodded slowly, cutting off the flood of questions, one hand drifting up to the wrist that had been gripped so hard, rubbing at it absently. The red marks of the man's fingers were still visible on her skin. "I'm all right," she said. "Thanks to him." Then she turned and looked up at David, really looked at him, and her eyes were full of something that went far, far beyond the ordinary gratitude of a stranger helped by a stranger. There was wonder in it, and a kind of ache, as though she had forgotten this was something people did for each other and was startled to be reminded. "You didn't even know me," she said softly, almost to herself. "You had no idea who I was. You just stood up." David gave a small shrug and an easier smile. The danger passed now, just a tired dad again. "I didn't need to know you," he said. "My daughter is watching." He tilted his head toward the window seat, where a small girl sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching her father with shining eyes, sitting up very straight the way children do when they are proud and want to be worthy of the thing they're proud of. "I want her to grow up believing that good men don't stay in their seats when someone needs help." It's an easy thing to say to a kid. It's a harder thing to let her watch you do. But she's the one who told me the lady was scared. So, he shrugged again. "Here we are." Across the room, Olivia smiled, and it was the proudest smile a child's face can hold. The smile of a little girl watching her father be exactly the man she already believed him to be. The woman followed his gaze to the little girl, and something in her expression shifted, softened, and steadied all at once. She looked back at David for a long moment. Then, quietly, she reached into her small black handbag. She drew out a card. It was sleek and black, matte and heavy, heavier than it looked. The kind of card that most people in that room had only ever heard rumors about. and across its face ran a distinctive platinum emblem that caught the calf lights and held them like something alive. She held it up, not toward the businessman, not toward the crowd, but toward the manager alone, and quietly asked him to take a look at it. The calf manager took it, still distracted, still half-focused on the guards and the crowd. He glanced down at it, ready to see an ordinary credit card, ready to nod and hand it back and get on with sorting out the mess in his calf. And then he actually saw it. He saw the emblem. He saw the name embossed beneath it. His face drained of color so fast and so completely that it was as if someone had reached inside him and pulled a plug. His eyes went wide. His hands began to tremble, the card shivering visibly between his fingers. "Oh my," he breathed, and the rest of it wouldn't come. He looked from the card to the woman, then back down to the card, then back up to her face, matching it now against a photograph he had seen in a corporate handbook, a face he had only ever seen from a distance at a company event. And the color that had left his skin was replaced by a dawning, dizzy horror. You're... Before he could finish, every employee within earshot turned toward her at once. The baristas, the busboy, the waitress who had frozen with her tray, all of them sensing in the same instant that the quiet woman in the burgundy dress, the woman they had refilled coffee for and cleared plates from and privately thought nothing about at all, was about to say something that would leave the entire room speechless. The manager could barely make his voice work. He held the card flat on his palm now, as though it had become too important to grip, as though it might burn him. "Ma'am," he said, and swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. This identification belongs to the owner of Bennett Global Holdings." Every employee in the cafe stared. A busboy near the kitchen door actually took a physical step back, as though the name had a force to it. Because the name meant something. The name meant everything, in that room especially. It was on the lease of the building they were all standing in. It was on the sign above the door. It was on the paychecks folded in their pockets and direct deposited into their accounts. It was on 400 other doors in 400 other towns across the country. And it had been sitting at table 6 the whole time, drinking a medium coffee, watching them all. The woman took a slow, quiet breath. The breath of someone who had let a room believe she was ordinary for as long as it served her, and now had a reason to stop. "My name is Sarah Bennett," she said. Her voice was calm and clear, and it carried to every corner of the silent cafe. "I own this cafe, and more than 400 others across the country." The businessman let out a nervous laugh, high and cracked. "Nice joke," he said. "Very funny." "You expect anyone to." Sarah turned and looked directly at him, and the laugh died in his throat. "You've spent the last 6 months trying to win a contract with my company," she said, and her voice was quiet, but it filled the whole room. 6 months of meetings, of polished proposals, of shaking my executives' hands and telling them again and again what a man of character you are, how much your company values respect and integrity. She let the words hang. "And today, when you thought no one important was watching, when you thought you were just an important man dealing with a woman who didn't matter, instead of showing character, you showed everyone in this room exactly who you are. You just didn't know it was me you were showing." The confidence drained out of his face like water through a crack in a dam, all at once and then faster. "No," he said, shaking his head, the word coming out small and childlike. "No, there has to be some mistake. She can't be. Somebody's playing there isn't a mistake," the cafe manager said quietly, still holding the card flat on his palm. He couldn't quite look at the man as he said it. "I've seen her at corporate meetings. I've seen her photograph in the head office, on the wall, right when you walk in. It's her. It's really her." The room fell completely, perfectly silent. The businessman looked around, slowly at first and then faster, more desperately the way a man looks for a door in a room that has none. He searched every face for a single ally, A single person willing to say that he wasn't so bad, that it was all a misunderstanding, that anyone might have lost their temper on a hard day. He looked at the men who had been sitting near him, the ones who might have been his kind. He looked at the crowd. He found nothing. Every single face that met his eyes looked away. Every person he had unconsciously counted on to blend into the background of his important life had just watched him show them precisely who he was when he thought no one was keeping score, and not one of them, not a single one, would stand beside him now. He was completely alone in a crowded room, and he had done it to himself. Sarah turned away from him, as though he had already shrunk into something too small to hold her attention any longer, and faced David instead. Every trace of hardness left her voice. What replaced it was quieter and somehow heavier, harder to carry. "You stepped between us without ever asking my name," she said. "You didn't know I owned this building. You didn't know I owned anything at all. For all you knew, I was a waitress on her break, or a student, or nobody at all. You had nothing to gain. There was no reward coming, no contract, no favor, nothing. You only saw someone who needed help. And you got out of your chair. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you have any idea?" David shifted, plainly uncomfortable with the weight of her eyes on him, the way genuinely decent people almost always are when someone tries to hand their decency back to them as a speech. He looked at his shoes for a second. "My father taught me something," he said finally, "a long time before I ever joined the Navy. I was maybe 12, and I'd done something I wasn't proud of, only been good because he was watching. And he sat me down, and he told me that if your courage depends on who's watching, then it isn't courage at all. It's just performance. Real character is what you do when you're certain no one will ever know." That stuck with me. He gave a small, self-conscious shrug. "I've tried to live like he was always in the room, even after he wasn't anymore." Sarah was quiet for a moment, letting the words settle over the room like dust. And then a small shape came flying across the caf floor. Olivia had left her window seat, unable to stay in it 1 second longer, and she crossed the room at a dead run and threw both arms around her father's waist, pressing her face into his side, holding on with the fierce, whole body grip that only small children have. "I knew you'd help her, Dad," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I knew you would. I knew it." David's whole face changed. Whatever was left of the hardness in him, the stillness he had put on to cross that floor, melted completely the instant her arms went around him. He was not a soldier anymore. He was just a father. He rested his big hand on the top of her head, over the careful braids, and bent down and kissed the part he had made that morning. "I hope one day," he said softly, "just for her, you'll choose kindness just as fast as you believed I would. That's all. That's the only thing I want for you." Sarah watched the two of them. The tall man bent over the small girl, and something moved across her face that she didn't bother to hide. And then she did something that surprised the whole room. She knelt down, right there on the caf floor, in her burgundy dress, on knees that had knelt in boardrooms and at ribbon cuttings but rarely on a caf floor for a child, so that she was level with the little girl. She waited, patient, until Olivia turned her head and peeked out at her from her father's side. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah asked her, gently, the way you speak to a child you want to actually reach and not just talk at. Olivia nodded. "You have the very best example anyone could ever ask for. Standing right here. Do you know that?" She glanced up at David, then back to his daughter. "Most people go their entire lives and never once see somebody do what your father just did. And you saw it, up close, before you were even 9 years old. On the days when it's hard to be brave, when everyone around you is sitting down and it would be so much easier to sit down too, you're going to remember that your dad stood up. And it's going to help you stand up too." Olivia looked up at her father, then back at Sarah, and nodded slowly, solemnly, the way children nod when something important has been handed to them, filing it carefully away in the serious place where kids keep the few things they somehow know they'll need for the rest of their lives. Sarah rose to her feet, unhurried, and smoothed her dress. And when she turned back to the businessman, the warmth was gone from her face entirely. What remained was not anger. It was something quieter than anger and far more final. It was the look of a decision that had already been made. As of this moment, she said, every business relationship between you and Bennett Global Holdings is permanently terminated. Every contract under discussion is dead. Every proposal your company has sitting on my desk goes in the trash tonight. And I'll be making a personal call to my board first thing tomorrow, so there's no confusion about why. She nodded once, calmly, toward the 2 security guards by the door. And he is no longer welcome at any property my company owns. Not this caf, not any of the 400 others, not the offices, not the hotels, not the parking structures. If this man walks into a Bennett building anywhere in this country again, you remove him. Is that clear? The guards nodded. Yes, ma'am, one of them said. The businessman's composure shattered all at once, like glass hitting a floor. The looming, the contempt, the bottomless certainty that the world would always rearrange itself around his wishes. All of it collapsed inward into something small and frightened and pleading. Wait, he said, and his voice cracked right down the middle. Wait, please, I was angry. I'd had a terrible day. I didn't mean any of it. It just got out of hand. One bad moment. That's all it was. You can't judge a whole man on one, Sarah interrupted him, calm and even. Without a single trace of cruelty and without a single trace of mercy either. The absence of both was somehow the most devastating thing about it. The moment she asked you to let go, she said, should have been enough. She asked you 3 times. You had 100 chances today to be a decent man, and every one of them was easier than the one you're begging me for right now. You didn't take any of them. She paused. Respect isn't something you show only when you find out someone is powerful or useful to you. If it only shows up when it's expensive not to, it was never respect at all. That's just fear wearing a suit. And I wanted to do business with a man's character. You showed me you don't have any. The guards stepped forward and took the man by the arms, one on each side. He didn't fight them. There was nothing left in him to fight with. They walked him toward the exit, past all the tables, and the entire caf watched him go in complete, ringing silence. No one shouted after him. No one gloated or jeered. No one even looked at him with anger anymore, because anger would have been a kind of attention, a kind of energy spent on him. And he had earned something colder and worse than anger. He had earned the quiet. Every head in the room turned slowly to follow him out, and every face held the same flat, unforgiving stillness. The look people give a thing that has revealed itself and can never unreveal it. He kept his eyes down. He couldn't meet any of them, and by the time the glass door swung shut behind him and clicked into its frame, the shame in that room, all of it, belonged entirely to him and to no one else in the world. The door closed. For a long moment, nobody moved and nobody spoke. Then Sarah turned to face the whole caf, all of it, every table and every seat and every face. And she raised her voice just enough to carry into every corner of the room. Today, she said, dozens of people watched a woman be harassed and grabbed against her will, in the middle of the afternoon in a room full of light. Dozens of you saw it happen. Most of you were closer to it than he was. She lifted her hand toward the window seat, toward David. You saw it first. You had more time to act than he did. She let that sit for a moment, not delivered as an accusation, not sharp, just laid gently on the table for everyone to look at and sit with. And only one person stood up. She turned and looked at David, and her voice softened. One. And he didn't do it because he expected a reward. He didn't do it because he knew who I was, because he didn't. He didn't do it because there was a single thing in it for him. He did it because that is simply who he is, all the way down on an ordinary afternoon when no one at all was offering him anything to be brave. That's the only kind of good that actually counts. The kind that shows up when it costs you and pays you nothing. For one long heartbeat, the caf was completely silent. And then it broke. The applause started somewhere near the back. A single pair of hands, tentative, and then another joined it. And another. And then it swept across the whole room all at once, like a wave finally breaking on a shore. Chairs scraped against the floor as people rose to their feet, one table and then the next, until nearly the whole café was standing. Some of them were clapping hard. Some of them were wiping at their eyes and pretending they weren't, clearing their throats, looking at the ceiling. The waitress who had frozen with her tray at the very beginning, who had watched it all unable to move, was applauding hardest of anyone, tears running down her face without shame. An elderly couple by the window stood slowly, holding hands. The sound swelled and filled the café and pressed against the front glass and spilled out onto the sidewalk, where a few passers-by stopped and looked in, wondering what they had missed. And David stood in the very middle of all of it, one hand resting on his daughter's shoulder, plainly and visibly wishing he could be anywhere else on earth. He had never wanted any of this. He hadn't stood up for applause, and the applause made him deeply uncomfortable because it turned a thing he thought of as simply correct into a performance, and performance was the exact thing his father had warned him about. He had wanted a quiet afternoon, a cup of coffee, one good, ordinary, unremarkable day with his girl before he had to put the uniform back on and ship out again. He gave the room a small, awkward nod, the nod of a man accepting something he'd rather decline, and then he looked down at Olivia, away from all of them, and Olivia looked back up at him, like he had personally hung every star in the sky. That, right there, was the only applause he had ever needed. When the applause finally began to settle, and people slowly returned to their seats still glancing at him, Sarah stepped closer to David and held out a small envelope. Cream-colored, unmarked. David looked down at it but didn't take it right away. He recognized the shape of the thing, the shape of a reward, and everything in him pulled back from it. "Ma'am," he started, you don't have to give me anything." "I didn't do it for, I know you didn't," Sarah said. "That's exactly why I want to. And it's not payment." She pressed it gently but firmly into his hand, folding his fingers over it before he could refuse. "I would never insult what you did by trying to put a price on it. This is an invitation. I run a company with tens of thousands of employees and hundreds of properties, and every single day I'm trying to find people I can trust. Not people with the right people with the right character. They're much harder to find, and most of the time I can't tell who has it until it's too late to matter." She glanced, just barely, toward the door the businessman had left through. "But you showed me yours in the clearest way a person can. So if you ever retire from the Navy, whenever that day comes, I would be honored to have someone with your integrity lead the safety and training program for every Bennett property in America. All of it. In the hands of a man who steps in front of trouble when there's nothing in it for him." She paused. "The offer has no expiration date. Whenever you're ready. If you're ever ready. The door stays open." David turned the envelope over once in his hands, and for a moment he was quiet, and something complicated moved behind his eyes. The weight of a real future being offered to a man who had learned not to count on futures. Then he looked back up at her with a grateful, tired smile. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it all the way down. "Really, that means more than you probably know." He glanced down at his daughter, who was watching the whole exchange with wide, careful eyes, and his voice went soft. "But I'll tell you the honest truth. Whatever's in this envelope, it isn't the thing I'm taking home from here today. Today my daughter watched her dad do the right thing when it would have been so much easier to just stay in my seat and finish my coffee and tell myself it wasn't my business. She's 8. She's going to remember this longer than she remembers almost anything else about being a kid. She's going to build a piece of herself out of it." He shook his head slowly. "That's worth more to me than any job in the world. You can't put that in an envelope." Sarah looked at him for a long, quiet moment, and then she nodded, once, and she didn't try to argue, and she didn't try to press him further. Because she understood, standing there, that she had just met one of the rarest things a person can meet in a lifetime. a man who already had, in full, the only thing he actually wanted. David took Olivia's hand. "Come on, sweetheart," he said. "Let's finish our hot chocolate." They turned toward the door together, the tall father and the small girl with the careful braids, her hands swallowed up in his, and the applause swelled again as they crossed the room. And then, near the front, an old man rose slowly from his table by the door. He was easily 80, maybe older, a folded newspaper still in one spotted hand, and he pushed himself up to standing with the stiff, deliberate care of a body that had carried a long, full life and felt every year of it. His wife reached to steady him, and he waved her off gently. He wanted to do this on his feet. As David approached, the old man lifted one hand and quietly took the cap from his own head, an old flat cap, worn soft with years, and he held it against his chest, over his heart, and he gave a small, deliberate nod. It was a gesture from another era, a gesture most of the young people in the room wouldn't have known the full weight of. One old soldier's respect passed silently to a young one. There was something in the old man's eyes, some recognition that ran deeper than the afternoon's events. The look of a man who had once stood where David stood, in other rooms, in other decades, and who knew exactly what it costs and exactly what it's worth. He said nothing at all. He didn't need to say a word. It was honor handed quietly from one generation to the next. From a man near the end of his long road to a man still walking the middle of his. And, though none of them named it, to the small girl watching wide-eyed between them, who would carry it further down the road than either man would ever live to see. David caught the gesture and understood it completely, and it stopped him. He paused, just for a moment, right there in the aisle. And then he straightened and returned the old man's nod with one of his own, slow and respectful, one to another, across 60 years and no distance at all. Something passed between the two of them in that look that didn't need any words wrapped around it. Then David squeezed his daughter's small hand, and the two of them walked out through the glass door into the bright afternoon light, and the door swung slowly shut behind them, and the applause carried on inside without him. The way the best things you do tend to carry on in rooms after you've already gone. Outside, on the sidewalk, Olivia looked up at her father, squinting in the sun. "Dad," she said, "can we still get the cookie?" And David laughed. Really laughed, the tension of the whole afternoon breaking loose out of him all at once. "Yeah, baby," he said, and swung her hand as they walked. "We can still get the cookie." That afternoon, a billionaire walked into a cafe expecting nothing and walked back out with her faith in people quietly, unexpectedly restored. She had spent most of her adult life being treated wonderfully by people who wanted something from her. People who were kind to her face because of what her signature could do for them, and she had grown so used to it that she had almost forgotten there was any other kind of kindness in the world. And then, in the space of a few minutes, on an ordinary Tuesday, a tired stranger who wanted absolutely nothing from her at all had reminded her what the real thing looks like when you finally see it again. But the greatest victory that day did not belong to the woman who owned 400 calves. And it certainly did not belong to the powerful man walked out into the street with nothing left but the ruin he had made of himself. It belonged, from beginning to end, to a quiet single father in a faded shirt. A man that nearly every person in that room had looked right past, who proved with one steady hand and one calm, level voice that true honor is not measured by wealth, and it is not measured by rank, and it is not measured by recognition or applause or the size of the name on your card. It is measured by one thing only: the courage to protect a stranger when every other person in the room has decided to stay seated. So let me ask you again, and this time really think about it. If you had been there, if it had been you at that table watching it happen, would you have stood up? Would you have crossed that floor? Be honest with yourself in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if you believe the world needs more quiet men like David and fewer people staying in their seats, then subscribe for more stories like this one and share this video with someone who needs the reminder that standing up still matters. Because the truth is, most people will spend their whole lives waiting for someone else to be the one. Be the one who stands up.